Hello, everybody. We are so excited to be back for another reading of our books, and we have finished our September readings, and we were so thrilled to read books that talked about diversity, or that was the theme. They were really great books. We got a lot of wonderful feedback.
We did. It was great.
So thank you for being part of that with us in September. And now we start our new month. It's October, and it's a spooky month. So we are going to be reading books with that spooky October theme. If you haven't already done so, check out our kindergarten and first grade book. That was our first book selection for October. We had a very special, well, actually two very special celebrity guests. So check out the kindergarten and first grade reading. But today we have Mrs. Hendrickson reading our chapter book.
So for this new book we'll be reading, it's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, retold from Washington Irving. So we're going to read 4 chapters. They're pretty quick chapters. So we're going to read 4 chapters in this setting. So sit back, close your eyes, start building that picture in your brain as I'm reading the words. Chapter 1, Sleepy Hollow. Tarrytown sat on the shores of the mighty Hudson River in New York State. It was a pretty town with hills and valleys and a rushing stream and lush forests. Tarrytown was truly beautiful, but it was also cursed. Cursed with the presence of ghouls and goblins, witches and ghosts. Many of these ghosts were not friendly, and all of them loved to terrorize the good people of Tarrytown. Yes, there was definitely something strange in the air around Tarrytown. Folks who lived near there, and even those passing through, wandered around like they were in a dream. They saw things and heard things. They spent a lot of time thinking and talking about ghosts. You may wonder why the place where you live is not inhabited by ghosts. I can tell you. It is most towns are quite modern. People come and go. Things change. In those towns and villages, ghosts come out of their graves and find that their friends have moved away. There is no one left to visit or to haunt. So then they stay quiet in their graves and behave themselves. This is not the case in Tarrytown. The farmers who had settled there stayed a long time, and so did their families. Some people say that the town was bewitched by a German doctor during the early days of Tarrytown's settlement. Others claim that an old Indian chief had held powwows there before the English people arrived. During the Revolutionary War, soldiers from the British and the American sides had marches and fought in that area. Their spirits of these men lingered in the Tarrytown. And not far from Tarrytown was a particularly haunted place called Sleepy Hollow. At first glance, Sleepy Hollow seemed to be nothing more than a quiet, wooded valley. Giant walnut trees grew straight and tall. Lush grasses and shrubs covered the ground, and in the spring and summer, beautiful wildflowers bloomed on the banks of the bubbling streams. But beneath its lovely exterior lay something dark and mysterious. To the untrained ear, the sound of the murmuring stream was the only noise in Sleepy Hollow. But if you knew better, or if you listened very, very carefully, you might hear footsteps, or horses' hooves, or even horrible shrieks. Because in Sleepy Hollow, a restless ghost was always on the prowl. Chapter 2, The Headless Horseman. Of all the ghosts who lingered around Sleepy Hollow, the most famous and terrifying was the Headless Horseman. Nobody knew exactly who he was, but most believed him to be the ghost of an unfortunate soldier. Unable to rest in peace, the horseman rose from his grave in a nearby churchyard every night. He and his horse raced across the countryside to the place of his final battle. Searching desperately for his head, the horseman combed the battle area until it was almost daylight. Then, knowing that he must return to his grave before the sun rose, he roared back through the forest of Sleepy Hollow with his cloak flapping behind him, like the wings of a giant blackbird. Some say that the horseman carried a pumpkin head wherever he went. It sat in the front of him, resting on the saddle. Villagers claimed that the horseman hurled that pumpkin head at anyone who got in his way. Many people in Sleepy Hollow claimed to have had run-ins with the headless horseman. Some had been awoken from sleep at night by the thundering hooves outside of their window. Others had been dragged on wild rides throughout the countryside on the back of the horseman's black horse. Still others had been attacked as they walked home from a long day's work. The people of Tarrantown spoke often about the headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow. At parties and gatherings, children and grown-ups sat around the fireplace to hear tales of his nightly rides. When caught out after dark, the townspeople made as much noise as they could, trampling loudly through the woods. Everyone knew it could be deadly to surprise the headless horseman. Chapter 3. Ichabod Crane. It was true that the native people of Tarrantown were obsessed with ghosts and apparitions, and most of all, they feared the headless horseman. But people who moved to Tarrantown from other places were also soon entranced by the spookiness of the area. After living there for only a short time, they seemed to catch the ghost fever of the land. Such was the case for young Ichabod Crane, who moved to Tarrantown from a neighboring state of Connecticut. Ichabod was an odd man. His life was a patchwork of many different things. Ichabod was funny looking. He had a small head, big ears, and glassy green eyes. His feet were enormous. His arms and legs were unbelievably long. In fact, his hands seemed to dangle a mile below his shirt sleeves. When seen at a distance, you might have thought he was a scarecrow who had wandered out of the cornfield. As for his work, Ichabod was first and foremost a school teacher. He had moved to Tarrantown to teach in the one-room schoolhouse that was located in the spooky valley of Sleepy Hollow itself. Even though Ichabod looked funny, his students loved him. He was strict, of course. He had made sure that his students worked hard at their subjects, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And he was quick to punish a student who was late for misbehaving in class. He was also fair and treated everyone equally. During recess, Ichabod sometimes played games with the older children, and he was always willing to referee the students' games. When the school day was over, Ichabod often spent the afternoons with his students. He helped them with their homework or fished with them in the nearby stream. And he often walked with the younger children, seeing them home safely. Ichabod was also a singing teacher. He was proud of his voice and sang loudly, in church, whenever he was walking through the countryside, or even when bathing. Ichabod loved singing songs about church. He knew nearly all the church hymns by heart and enjoyed his job of teaching them to his students. On Sundays, Ichabod strutted across the front of the church and took a position near the altar. His children's choir was on one side of him and the congregation on the other. While the organist played, he and his singing pupils belted out one hymn after another, and the congregation joined in. Some believed this time in church, singing was the highlight of Ichabod's week. Unfortunately for Ichabod, teachers were not well paid at that time. It was respectable to be a schoolmaster, but the money was not good. This could have been terrible for Ichabod because he loved to eat. He ate so much, in fact, that everyone wondered how he stayed so skinny. He ate enough for 3 men, and since his paycheck was so small, he would have to spend every last penny on food. There would be nothing left for him to have a place to live. Luckily, the people of Tarrantown liked Ichabod, and they developed a clever system to help their hungry, poorly paid schoolmaster. To make ends meet, Ichabod was invited to live at his people's homes. He would stay with one family for a week or so and then go to another, moving around until he was back with the first family once again. Now this setup could have caused problems. Some of the farmers didn't think school was necessary for their children. Also, they had to pay for their children to go to school. To house and feed the schoolmaster on top of those things was quite bothersome. So it was a good thing that Ichabod always managed to be helpful around the farms. He helped make hay, mend fences, water the horses, drive the cows, and cut wood for winter fires. All of this extra helped make the farmers happy, and even the grumpiest of them had to agree that Ichabod was a good man and a hard worker. So they did not mind too much when the schoolmaster devoured the food at their breakfast and dinner tables. As for the farmers' wives, Ichabod had no trouble winning them over. He was always complimenting them on their wonderful food, and was very sweet with the little children. In school he was strict and stern, but in the farmhouses he was gentle and loving. Ichabod spent many an evening with a child on his knee, or rocking one in a cradle for hours at end. So between teaching school subjects, singing hymns, and lodging at one local farmhouse or another, Ichabod Crane managed to live a happy, healthy life. For a time. Chapter 4. Ghosts and Goblins. Ichabod, along with most of the people who lived near Sleepy Hollow, was a firm believer in witches and ghosts. He had his very own copy of a book called History of New England Witchcraft, and he read it over and over. He carried it wherever he went. So it was not surprising that when Ichabod was not busy teaching in the schoolhouse, helping mend fences, rocking children to sleep, or wafting down the dinner food, he could be seen or heard sitting around farmhouse fireplaces, listening to or spinning tales of his own of ghosts and goblins. He was even caught hanging around haunted brooks and bridges, between witch barns and houses, or anything else that went bump in the night. Ichabod loved listening during these spooky story sessions. He loved the crackle of the fire as the storyteller's voice echoed in the darkness. He loved the feeling of tingles running up and down his spine, and he loved to hear about the Headless Horseman, a spectacle he himself had never seen. And more than anything, Ichabod loved to tell his own stories. While the fires crackled and spat, he would tell his intended listeners about all kinds of witchcraft and omens and spells. Then he would rant about the blackness and the unknown of outer space, comets and shooting stars. And at last shocking tale, he would burst out that the world was constantly spinning around. Half the time the very own town lived upside down. Of course, many of the villagers did not believe a word of Ichabod's tales about outer space or the world spinning, but they were certain that his tales of ghosts and witches were absolutely true. After a particular scary tale, the conversation would bubble like a witch's brew. Eyes around the fire would shine bright. Everyone knew that they were safe for a time. No goblin or ghost would dare show itself during a cozy forest time full of cheerful human faces. Then, when it was quite late and very dark outside, everyone would head home for the night. Some villagers whistled as they climbed into their wagons. Others chatted as they strode in small groups down the path. But Ichabod didn't either. He often had to walk all by himself to whatever farmhouse he was in, and tiptoed carefully through the woods alone. His imagination ran wild. Fear gripped his heart. Every tree, shrub, and fence post was a ghost in the dark night. His own footsteps echoed in the country's stillness, and every gust of wind made his blood run cold. He was certain that each time he heard a thump or a snap, it was none other than the Headless Horseman. Of course the trees and shrubs and fence posts and winds did not hurt Ichabod, nor did his own footsteps, but his fear made him crazy. It was only when he finally reached the cozy farmhouse where he stayed that he started to feel better. Then, as he lay in bed in the darkness, Ichabod could not help listening for bumps and howls in the night. And more than once, just outside his window, Ichabod was certain he heard the galloping hooves of his Headless Horseman. All right, well, we're going to stop there for this evening. Thanks so much for listening to our story. We're really excited about reading this spooky book for the month of October.